What method did the Lord use to convince Gideon that Israel would defeat the Midianites? This is the question that we seek to answer today as we continue our verse-by-verse study of the book of Judges on Walking Through the Bible.
Glory of his cross.
Today we're going to be discussing Judges 7 verses 9 to 18, but before we do that, let's read the passage. If you have a Bible, you can turn to Judges chapter 7 verse 9, but if you don't have a Bible, don't worry, just follow along with us on the screen. The version that we'll be reading from is the New King James Version. So Judges chapter 7, beginning at verse 9. It happened on the same night that the Lord said to him, "Arise, go down against the camp, for I have delivered it into your hand. But if you are afraid to go down to the camp with Purah your servant, and you shall hear what they say, and afterward your hand shall be strengthened to go down against the camp." Then he went down with Purah his servant to the outposts of the armed men who were in the camp. Now the Midianites and the Amalekites, all the people of the east, were lying in the valley as numerous as locusts, and their camels were without number, as the sand by the seashore in the multitude. And when Gideon had come, there was a man telling a dream to his companion. He said, "I have had a dream. To my surprise, a loaf of barley bread tumbled into the camp of Midian. It came to a tent and struck it so that it fell and overturned, and the tent collapsed." Then his companion answered and said, "This is nothing else but the sword of Gideon, the son of Joash, a man of Israel. Into his hand God has delivered Midian and the whole camp." And so it was, when Gideon heard the telling of the dream and its interpretation, that he worshipped. He returned to the camp of Israel and said, "Arise, for the Lord has delivered the camp of Midian into your hand." Then he divided the 300 men into 3 companies, and he put a trumpet into every man's hand, with empty pitchers and torches inside the pitchers. And he said to them, "Look at me, and do likewise. Watch, and when I come to the edge of the camp, you shall do as I do. When I blow the trumpet, I and all who are with me, then you will also blow the trumpets on every side of the camp, and say, 'The sword of the Lord and of Gideon.'" In our last lesson, we found out how Gideon had gathered his army to battle the Midianites. The Lord saw this army, which numbered about 32,000, and said that the number was too large. For if Israel defeated the Midianites with the size of this army, then they would think that they did so by their own power, and not by God's power. Gideon was then told to tell the fearful to go home. This shrunk the army to about 10,000. But even that number was too large for the Lord's liking, so he told Gideon to bring his men to water and watch them drink. Those who stooped down, gathered water in their hand, and lapped it up like a dog would be divided into one group, and those who knelt down to drink would be divided into another group. It turns out that 300 men stooped down to gather water in their hand, while 9,700 kneeled down to drink. God chose the 300 to be in Gideon's army to defeat the Midianites. Now, seeing the Lord do this, even the most confident person in God's power might get them to think twice. But Gideon is not the most confident people. He required God to remain with him until he brought a sacrifice to him to ensure that it was in fact God who appeared to him. Gideon required that God perform the sign of the fleece twice in order for him to believe that God would save Israel from the Midianites by his hand. And now God has taken his large army down to 300 men to fight a Midianite army that's described as numerous as locusts. Is God sure? God knew this of Gideon, and so, as he had done twice before, God dealt with Gideon from where he was. That night the Lord said for Gideon's army to attack the Midianite army. But if Gideon was fearful, he could take Purah his servant and go and listen to what the Midianites were saying. When he did this, the Lord said that Gideon would be strengthened. So Gideon took the Lord up on his offer, for it turns out he was a little fearful. And when Gideon came near the Midianite camp, what he heard was a man telling another of his dream. In this dream, what he had seen was a loaf of barley tumbling into the camp of Midian, and it came into the tent and struck it so that it fell, was overturned, and it collapsed. What was being described here is that this barley loaf tumbled into the commander's tent and overthrew it. We can know from this, from the interpretation of the dream, which was that the entire Midian army was about to be overthrown. But by whom? Gideon, who was being aided by Jehovah. Now, why had they come to this conclusion from this dream? Well, for one, Gideon was the one whom the Midianites were facing in battle, but perhaps this dream was about something well in the future. The barley loaf is the key. Barley loaves are the food of the poor. Gideon is not only of the poor class of Manasseh, but Israel is regarded this way among the neighboring nations at this time, as evidenced by the Midianites oppressing Israel at this time. Thus, what the dream was saying was those that they regarded as poor would defeat them. That had to be Gideon. Hearing about this dream, which had been sent by God, and its interpretation served two purposes for Gideon. First, it strengthened his courage in God, so much so that he worshipped God for this. But second, it also gave Gideon insight into the mindset of the Midianites, which was now one of fear. If the Midianites were fearful and Israel was courageous, both done by the power of God, then Gideon could have confidence of victory. So with this newfound confidence, Gideon returned to his camp and told them to get up then and there, for God had delivered the Midianites into their hand. Gideon then divided his 300 men into 3 companies, gave each man a trumpet, a torch, and an empty pitcher to hide the torch in while they advanced in secret to the Midianites. He instructed the men to follow his lead. When they came to the edge of the camp, he would blow the trumpet and say, "The sword of the Lord and of Gideon," as his battle cry. They would then do exactly what Gideon had just done. Notice here that Gideon was careful to put Jehovah's name first. God was leading Israel's army and giving them the victory, but he was using Gideon to accomplish his purpose. Thus, in Gideon's mind, he put himself in the right place. We'll continue with the story, the Lord willing, in the next lesson. With that, our time is up for today. The Lord willing, we hope you'll join us for tomorrow's discussion of Judges 7 as we continue our walk through the Bible, one verse at a time. Thank you for watching today's episode. We hope that you found it edifying and ask that you not only subscribe to our channel and podcast, but that you like and share this episode among your friends so that the saving gospel of Jesus Christ can go out to the whole world.